Hakeem Olajuwon's back-to-back championship run in the 90s needs to be talked about a lot more. With so many conversations happening about how great Jokic and Embiid have been playing, I really feel like Hakeem's name gets slided out of the best or most talented big man of all time debates. Hell, last year after winning his first NBA title, people were ready to crown Jokic as already a top 5 center ever and the most skilled big man of all time. And the whole time I'm hearing this, I'm like, Jokic is great, of course, but do y'all remember what Hakeem was like? And what he was able to do in back-to-back seasons in the mid-90s was something we haven't seen any player do 30 years since. So let's get into it. So Hakeem entered the 1993-94 season already with 8 All-Star appearances, 4 All-NBA first-team selections, and just won his first Defensive Player of the Year award in the previous season. He also had already led the league in block shots and rebounds twice in his career at this point. Now, let's also take note that Hakeem, at this point in his already illustrious career, had already made an NBA Finals appearance. He led Houston to the championship round in 1986 after knocking off the defending champion LA Lakers in just 5 games, but they ultimately lost to the Celtics in the finals in 6 games despite an unreal performance from the Dream. He averaged 24.7 points, 11 rebounds, 3.2 blocks, and also 2.3 steals, including a game with 4 steals, which is second on the all-time list for steals for a center in a game during an NBA Finals series. And the only reason I wanted to briefly mention that series was to debunk that idea that I totally hate, that Hakeem was just quote-unquote bailed out by Jordan's 2-year absence in the 90s, as if we didn't see him come just a few games short of a ring in an era that was completely dominated by the Lakers and Celtics. But now that that's out the way, let's get back to the 1993-94 season. Obviously, this was the first year Jordan had retired from the league to pursue some other things, so the aura around the season was completely different, especially with him coming off of 3 consecutive championships. Nonetheless, to say Hakeem and the Rockets were dominant that season would be a complete understatement. They started the year off on a ridiculous 15-game winning streak, which is the second best winning streak to start off a season in NBA history. Hakeem was unreal during that entire season, posting a career-best 27.3 points, 11.9 rebounds, 3.6 assists, 1.6 steals, and 3.6 blocks. He edged out David Robinson and Scottie Pippen for his first career league MVP award and beat out David Robinson again for his second consecutive Defensive Player of the Year award. So let's stop it right here. Not only was Hakeem such a force on the offensive end, but his defensive prowess to match that is rare amongst the league's best all-time big men. If we look at some of the top 5 bigs of all time and even compare him to our 2 best in the league right now, there are very few you can name who were so prolific and polished offensively while being able to dominate on the defensive end. One could argue that at this point, not only was Hakeem the best offensive player in the game, but also the best defensive player as well. So at this point, Hakeem had solidified himself as the most dangerous two-way threat in all of basketball. So Houston was able to enter the playoffs that year as the 2nd seed in the Western Conference, and they had an amazing run. They outed the Portland Trail Blazers 3-1 in the first round, and in the second round, despite falling 0-2 to the defending Western Conference champion Phoenix Suns, they were able to climb back and win that series in 7 games. Once they got to the conference finals, they outed Karl Malone, John Stockton, and the Utah Jazz 4-1, setting up a matchup against Patrick Ewing and the top-seeded team in the Eastern Conference, the New York Knicks. Now, let's sit back and think about the significance of this matchup. We have 2 of the league's 3 best centers matching up against each other in a final series. Since this series, and also the 1995 final series, which dates back to a little bit over 30 years ago, we have not gotten 2 big men of this stature clashing against one another in the NBA Finals. And this series was as good as advertised. It went 7 games, but we saw Hakeem completely outduel Patrick Ewing on both sides. Hakeem averaged nearly 27 points, 9 rebounds, and nearly 4 blocks while holding Pat to just 19 points per game, and that was 5 points lower than his regular season average. The Rockets went on to win their first title in franchise history, and obviously Hakeem took home MVP honors. So he was able to cap off arguably the greatest two-way season in NBA history with the championship victory and possibly the crown for the best player in the NBA. And if you didn't think that was impressive enough, let's talk a bit about the 94-95 season. The Rockets came into the season with a few additions to their roster. They moved away Otis Thorpe, who was a big part of their finals run, to bring back All-Star guard and Hall of Famer Clyde Drexler to boost the roster just a bit. But still, this regular season wasn't quite as impressive as the season before. They dipped a bit in production, but they still did get another great year from Hakeem. He averaged 27.8 points, 10.8 rebounds, 3.5 assists, and 3 blocks. And even in a down year, Clyde did show that he was a reliable enough second option. He averaged 21 points and 7 rebounds, and him and Hakeem both made the All-NBA third team. Houston entered the playoffs as the 6th seed in the West, so a bit of an underdog for most of the postseason, but that's what made this run even more impressive. So going into the playoffs, they knocked out the higher-seeded Jazz in 5 games. Despite initially going down 2-1, they were able to follow that series up by knocking out the Suns for the 2nd consecutive year. They trailed 3-1 in that series, but Houston was able to climb back against this team once again, ultimately winning in 7. And here's where things get super impressive. impressive. We get to the West Finals, where we have the Rockets matching up against the top-seeded team in the West, the San Antonio Spurs. Two Texas teams who also just happened to have the two best centers in the NBA at that time matched up against each other. David Robinson at that point was the league's MVP, averaging 27.6 points and 10 rebounds on the season, and also making the All-NBA first team. He had Hakeem's MVP award. He took Hakeem's spot on the All-NBA first team, so this was like a perfect revenge matchup for the Dream. And boy, did he take advantage of the moment. In all of his disappointment, he averaged 35 points, 12 boards, 4 blocks, and 5 steals, and outscored the Admiral by 12 points per game as the Rockets won out against the West top seed in 6 games. So here we have yet another example of Hakeem dominating a top big man in his era for an entire series. This ultimately made way for a finals matchup against the Orlando Magic, who were the top seed in the East that year, and also featured a young Shaquille O'Neal who was in his absolute athletic prime. And again, we have another example of Hakeem dominating another premier player at that center position. He averaged an NBA Finals career best 32.8 points, 11.5 rebounds, nearly 6 assists and 2 blocks with 2 steals, and led the Rockets to their second consecutive NBA championship. So let's recap and let's talk about the significance of that 2-year run. In the span of those 2 years, Hakeem had arguably the best two-way season in NBA history. In the span of 2 years, Hakeem had arguably the best two-way season in NBA history. And in 1994, he and the Rockets knocked out the defending Western Conference champions and then beat out the best team in the East in the finals. And then the next year, they entered the 1995 playoffs as an underdog and eliminated the best teams in both conferences on the way to winning their second consecutive title. And during both of those years, Hakeem completely dominated each of the best players at his position during playoff series, literally winning head-to-head matchups against them. It's a back-to-back run that will be very difficult to duplicate, and I honestly don't think we've seen anything quite like it since, especially from a player at that center position. So maybe this video will help you rethink where you place Hakeem amongst the NBA's all-time best big men.